What's up? What's up, world? How are we doing? I hope you guys are doing well. I know we're starting off a little bit late, but hey, we're always here, and I'm really excited to talk with our guy today, Dr. Timothy J. Golden. But before we get to him, I just wanted to give you some shout outs, give you some love. Sorry about all the little bit of mix up. You know, every week we're trying to get a little bit better at our game, and every week the devil tries to push us back 3 steps. So we're gonna make the devil a liar and keep moving forward. I hope you guys are doing well. How is the world out there? So if you haven't had a chance, please make sure you like, subscribe, or share, or follow. We are growing in our YouTube channel, which is great, but I want more of us to just get on in there. The conversation today is going to be beautiful. So if you haven't already, hook somebody up with the information, get it out there. Now, another cool little thing is that in the description, I have started this week leaving a link in there in case you want to jump into our newsletter. You might be wondering who's coming up next week or the week after or the week after. Well, this way you will always know, because I shoot out a weekly little newsletter about what's happening, not just about who's coming on Tuesday tea time, but what's happening around our conference with young adults, with youth, with events that we've got going on. So check it out. Check the link out, click on it, give us your info, and I'll put you on that newsletter. Today, we're going to hang out with the man, the scholar, the legend, Dr. Timothy J. Golden. He's a law expert, a theologian, an actor, a writer. He does everything under the sun, and he is a lover of Jesus. We're going to have a blast talking about masculinity, about emotions, about life, and a ton more. But before we get there, I do want to take a moment and say hello to Robin Laxon. You're going to see her photo come up here in just a second. So this is for our Say Hello campaign. If you haven't already, feel free to go to scc.adventist.org/say hello and throw your stuff in there, and we'll be able to put it out to the world. Robin Laxon is a member at the Temple City Church, and she was looking forward to 2020. In 2019, it was a very exciting time in her life. She was about to experience one of the biggest accomplishments that she'd reached in her then life, which was being the first in her family to graduate with a master's degree. Yeah, Robin, doing a good work. As the weeks went by, she started making plans, started reserving the hotels and airplane tickets for her family to join her for this graduation. And then March 2020 hit like a ton of bricks. COVID-19 crashed everything like a domino effect. Everything was shut down and canceled, including Robin's graduation. Can you believe that? Oh, my girl, we feel for you. All of our young adults out there, all of our high school students who had to graduate last year without an actual graduation. It must have been tough. She came to the realization that although places were closed down, that Jesus still had his arms wide open. Although plans were getting canceled, she realized that the only thing that remained stable and consistent was being able to have a relationship with God. She started, in fact, a small group Vespers program digitally, and God multiplied that thing abundantly. Like it blew up. Boom. Thank you, Robin, for that reminder that God is never closed. Yeah, somebody say digital amen. Amen. All right. Next week, we're going to continue down in March talking about mental health and looking at our emotions with my guy, Marco Topete. Marco Topete is the Director of Literature Evangelism here in Southern California Conference. He's also a new dad, and he's really excited about this role. He's going to come on here and share his mind-blowing story of how he got to where he is today and all of the emotional and mental upheaval he had to go through, and share a few practical tips for us on how to get past some of our stumbling blocks and challenges. So don't miss out next week. But that's next week. This week, Dr. Timothy Golden. Hey, what's up, Dr. Timothy J. Golden?
Icky Timey, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
Yo, I'm much better now that I'm hanging with you, my man. I'm much better now that I'm hanging with you. How goes it
Thank
up in the
you, man.
Northwest?
Thank you so much. Well, it's going well up here. We've taken a turn for the better weather-wise, I think. Spring has come to us finally. Last week, we were recovering from some really cold winter air and some ice and snow, but looked outside
Woo.
today. The snow has melted. The temperatures up in
Hey.
the 50s. And yesterday was in the 60s. So I'm hoping that the extended forecast has no more snow in sight. And bye bye January and February. Hello, spring. So I'm excited.
Man, let me tell you. Yeah, the weather down here has been horrendous as well. I don't want to talk about that. Let's just move on. I don't want any hurt feelings, so we'll keep moving on about the weather thing. Doc,
All
what are you
right.
drinking today? Tell me, are you drinking something? Because this is tea time, so I hope you brought something to the table.
Today, Icky, I am drinking a vintage 2021 H2O, filtered fresh from my Brita pitcher, and it has a nice, clean, crisp flavor to it. And I think 2021 is going to be a good year.
Oh man, listen, that's an omen for some good things right there. Now, do you have a hint of limon in there?
No lemon. Just I like my H2O au natural. So just it's just the hydrogen and the oxygen molecules together, and that's it. That's what I'm having today.
Hey, we celebrate that, man. We celebrate that. So, thanks for coming on with me, Tim. It's I've really have
Hmm.
enjoyed our relationship, and this just started a couple years ago. I remember hearing you for the first time present, and it was out in Redlands, California, man. And you dropped the hammer so hard, man. It broke everything in that building. And I just from that moment on, I've just really enjoyed your company and enjoyed your wisdom and your counsel and your work. Special day. Thank you for coming on with us.
Thank you.
What is
Thank you
your
for having
current
me.
profession? Oh man, it's a pleasure.
I am professor of philosophy in the Department of History and Philosophy at Walla Walla University in College Place, Washington.
Mm. Now,
That's my
before
current
philosophy,
occupation. Hmm.
yeah. Before philosophy, it was law, right?
That's right. Before philosophy, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I like to call myself a lawyer in recovery now. I joke about that. I laugh about that a little bit. But yes, prior to my entrance into the academy as an academic philosopher, I was a criminal defense lawyer in and around the city of Philadelphia and in federal court, handled all types of criminal cases from retail theft and shoplifting to very serious charges, rape, robbery, murder, etc. And then I decided that I needed to change things. It was time for a change in my life. And I went back to graduate school and sought a PhD in philosophy, and that's where I am today. So I've been
Yeah,
in academics for
as
the
people
past
do. I
decade.
mean, I'm over law, so I'm just gonna go back and get a PhD, right? Yeah, that happens. That happens to the common folk. So.
Uh,
It's a fantastic story, and it reminds me that there's always time to rewrite or change your story as you're going along. That God's got plans for us at every stage of our life. Can you tell me just the cliff notes, uh, Tim, of your birthplace, your growth, why law, and then why philosophy? And now you went from Philly, and now you're in Walla Walla, Washington.
sure, sure. Well, I will give you the very abbreviated version. Born and raised in the fifth largest city of Philadelphia. I'm a big Philly sports fan, all things Sixers, Eagles, and yes, I even claim the Phillies, the baseball team. I grew up there, and as a kid growing up, I think I was sort of destined to be a lawyer because I was the youngest in my family, and I was often told that my opinions didn't matter because I was a baby, so to speak, right? And so I thought, man, what
Right.
would it be like one day to have an opinion that really mattered to a lot of people, you know?
Mm.
And so I I became inspired to attend law school. When I was an undergraduate, I had a professor who was a prosecutor in a local county around the Philadelphia area called Delaware County. And she really inspired me to go to law school. So I did. I went to law school because I wanted to represent poor people who got accused of committing crimes. And that's exactly what I was able to devote my
I love technology. This is the time we live in. I want to thank Pastor Pona for his hard work in the distance. He's trying to keep us together. But you know what? There's so much heat in here with Dr. Timothy Golden that the web can't hold us down. That's the problem, Tim. You bring too much heat, man. That's it's that Philly heat, man.
Well, hey man, shout out to the 215, my
Yeah, that's
hometown.
it. That's it.
Love it,
That's it.
love it, love it. But no,
So now
it
you
is.
were talking about you were in, I think it was it grad school or undergrad?
So I was in when I was an undergrad, I was
Mm,
inspired to attend law school by a professor of mine. She was a prosecutor, and she used to come to class and she would tell her war stories and of being in courtrooms and trying cases in front of judges and juries.
mm.
And I just found that to be fascinating. And I thought to myself, I think this is what I really want to do for a living. So when I was a senior in college, I did an internship at the public defender's office in Philly. And there I met a lawyer named Thurgood Matthews. He passed away recently, but he was my first real professional mentor. And it was from him that I learned the ins and outs of trying cases. He was at the time, I think about 30 years ago, probably the finest criminal defense lawyer in the city. He was
Wow.
a great lawyer, a great example to me, and I learned a lot from him. And so I went to law school, and I spent my career representing poor people. And I may have said this earlier before we got
I
cut
missed
off.
that. I missed this part right here.
What no one told me was that when you represent poor people, you don't make a whole lot of money. And so
Truth.
I spent the better part of my career in courtrooms fighting for people who could not give me anything in return. And
Hmm.
although it was extremely rewarding, and I can say with certainty that the cases that meant the most to me, where I believed I made the most difference, were cases where I got paid little or no money at all.
Mm.
And it was then that I started to realize that the practice of law wasn't just a career, it was a vocation, that it was something
Wow.
that God had called me to do. And it became a ministry of sorts for me. So I did that for a long time, for about 12 years. Then I went back to graduate school and pursued my first love in academics, which is philosophy. I taught at a paralegal school while I was practicing law. And I thought when I was going to transition away from law that I would put together the two things that I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed teaching and I enjoyed philosophy. So I
Hmm.
decided to make a career transition and go back to graduate school and become a philosophy professor. So here I am today. And when I finished my PhD 10 years ago, I got a job at a university just outside of Philadelphia called West Chester
Hmm.
University of Pennsylvania. I worked there for about 4 years, and I was recruited to come here to Walla Walla University. I had some
Wow.
serious personal things happening in my life at that time. We might get a chance to talk about some of those things later. But the Cliff Notes version is I stepped out on faith. I took the job here at Walla Walla University. I relocated here in the fall of 2015. I moved here on September 23rd, 2015, and I am now approaching the end of my 6th academic year here at Walla
Wow.
Walla University. So that's the Cliff Notes
Congratulations,
version.
man. Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
I want to thank Ruby. Yes, Ruby, thank you for praying for everybody that technology works, God willing. Yeah, we appreciate that comment. And you know what? I feel like we're trending in the correct direction. Sure, I've been doing this for a year now, and I should already know how to do it, but this happens, and it's part of life. Thanks, Ruby. Okay, so Dr. Golden, here you are. Now, you just decided that you would do law, went to law school, got past your boards, and started practicing. That's not an easy journey, my man. Like, so how much of that was desire? How much of it was grit? And how much of it was just a internal pure ability to do this?
Well, I'd have to say it was probably 90% grit and determination, and probably about 10% ability. I don't like to toot my own horn, but I know when I left Philadelphia to move, I went to law school in Houston, Texas. And when I left Philadelphia to go to Houston, I was determined to succeed in law school, even if it meant I had to live on a park bench.
Wow.
I was determined. I was the first I was the first person in my family to go to professional school. I had several siblings that had graduated from college, but no one had ever gone beyond college. So I was the first one in my family to do that. I got to Houston, Texas from Philly. I didn't know a soul. And it's interesting, Icky, that when we're involved in our professional pursuits and career goals, sometimes we think we're in it just for the degree or for the experience.
Right.
But it was during my time in Houston when I was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Hey,
it was it was in fact in just about a month I will be celebrating the 30th anniversary of my baptism, which took place on April the 6th, 1991. That's right. So there you go.
That is phenomenal. And it's pretty amazing how you started in one place and you've really just traversed over the landscape, and here you are. And yeah, Ruby says congratulations. I do too, man. Congratulations. You're a full grown Adventist now. You're 30.
I'm an adult, right? I'm in my 30s.
Yes, you're an adult now. But you've traversed the landscape and you moved from 5th largest city practicing law to being in Walla Walla, which is more of a rural setting, and a philosophy professor. Professor philosophy. Let me ask you something about being a philosophy professor, philosophy expert. What do you suppose is the most difficult question to deal with in your field?
Wow, if you asked 100 philosophers this question, you would probably get 100 different answers. And each one would relate to the philosophical question around which they have constructed their career as an academic.
Yes.
So with that as a disclaimer, I will say that in my very humble opinion, the most intriguing, the most difficult question of philosophy is the question of God. And it is a question, again, in the interest of transparency, I have devoted my career to this question. I have spent all of my energy the past decade since earning my PhD investigating what I would call the meta philosophical question, right? So
Fantastic. Yeah.
there's philosophy, and then there's philosophizing about philosophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my career is structured around this meta philosophical question of what role, if any, philosophy can play in Christianity. And I'm interested in the divergence and convergence of things like philosophy with scripture, philosophy with tradition. There are places where I think the convergence is incredibly um, beautiful, and there are places where the divergence between philosophy and Christianity is deeply troubling. But for me, what does it for me as a philosopher is the question of God. And to even phrase it that way speaks to some of the troubling dimensions of philosophy because, of course, to the Christian, God is not a question, right?
Yes.
There is
Right.
no
Right.
question about God's existence for the Christian. But of course, the philosopher needs rational argument and epistemological and metaphysical justification, right?
Yes.
The philosopher has to understand prior to believing, but the Christian says, I believe that I may understand, right?
Right.
And
Right.
these questions here, I like to jokingly refer to myself as a theologian in philosopher's clothes. Um, I, I love philosophy. I love the lessons of Greek philosophy, but I often find myself asking that age old question, echoing Tertullian, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What John 12, verse 20 says that the Greeks came to worship. And when the Greeks come to worship, that's saying something because the Greeks are an intellectual people committed to a rational understanding of the world according to the Logos. But
Right.
the real difference between Greek philosophy and Christianity is that for the philosopher, the Logos is the goal or the end. But for the Christian, the Logos is simply the beginning. John 1 1. The Logos
Mm-hmm.
was in the beginning. Christianity is not so much about the word as it is of John 1 1, as it is about the flesh of John 1:14, right? So so philosophy ends where Christianity begins, right?
Ooh,
Uh,
that'll preach.
and those are the questions that interest me the most.
Wow. Wow. If you were watching along with us and you may see me staring deeply at Tim, it's because like a child in the deep end of the water, I'm looking for the edge so that I can creep my way back to the shallow side. That's deep and profound and beautiful. Absolutely. Thanks for that, Tim. I appreciate that you are an individual who does that because it brings a sense of security and I feel like a sense of nurture to those of us who don't spend our time in the deep end like that.
Mm.
It's good to see somebody swimming around there.
Thanks,
In the
Iggy.
name of
I
Jesus.
appreciate that. Thank you.
If you're catching up with us and you just checked on through all of our mishaps earlier, I am with Dr. Timothy Golden, the philosophy professor at Walla Walla University. You had mentioned earlier that you picked up law because you wanted to stand up for the rights of poor people. Obviously, you went back, got your PhD in philosophy. You dabble very deeply in theology. With these three things in mind, I wanted to maybe ask you about the issue of social justice. I've heard some Christians and even some pastors try to say that we shouldn't be dabbling in social justice. This is a horrible matter. We need to stick to ecclesial things. We need to worry about the church, and those who are going off on social justice issues are just flaming liberals or people that are humanistic, right? So can I ask you a little bit about that? How are we as a church, how should we as a church wrestle with the matter of social justice?
Well, Icky, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. I think the first thing we have to do is make the really basic acknowledgement that um, the church has always been involved in politics. We have an entire department of our church devoted to matters that are politically engaged,
Yes, this is
right?
true. Yeah.
I mean, we have the Department of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty.
Religious
You know
liberties.
what makes me laugh, Icky, when I hear someone say what you just said, and in one breath they say, "Oh, the church shouldn't be involved in protest movements or social justice. We shouldn't be involved in politics." And in the next breath they say, "Hey, pastor, do you have my Sabbath accommodation letter?"
For my
I
employer.
mean, that to me is silly, right? So I want to
Right.
make 2 points along these lines, Icky. The first one is a broad theoretical point, and the second one is more practical and historical. So, very broadly, there's this question, right? Should the church be involved in politics? Well, let's clarify what we mean by politics.
Mm.
There's partisan politics, Democrat and Republican, with a lowercase p, which I think the church should stay away from, right? The church should not be in the business of endorsing political candidates.
Mm.
But then there is the political with a capital P. And the political is a much broader, all encompassing reference to a social arrangement of human beings organized under an authority that is empowered to make and enforce law. And if you consider politics in the sense of the political with a capital P, then from Genesis to Revelation, you see God's creation
Mm. Mm.
involved in political arrangements, beginning with Adam and Eve. You
Mm.
have a community of persons arranged under an authority, God, who is empowered to make law, don't touch the fruit of that tree, and enforce it. The day that you eat from it, you're going to die. And that's the basic unit
Mm.
of society or civilization is a political arrangement, right? Now,
Right.
when you view the political in this way, it's not difficult to see that as you go through scripture, think about Daniel and the Hebrew boys. Think
Yes.
about the Hebrew boys in the book of Daniel, right? They're engaged in a political arrangement. They're living under an authority that's empowered to make and enforce law. And when the law is enforced against them, they're placed into a fiery furnace, right? Think about
Right.
Daniel in the lion's den. Think
Hey.
about before, think about before that, the Hebrews enslaved in Egypt. And then when you go all the way to the end in Revelation, we
Mm-hmm.
talk about God establishing his what? His kingdom.
Kingdom.
The
Mm.
very notion of a kingdom is saturated in the political, right? And the joy of heaven will be a political arrangement in which there ceases to be strife because there won't be sin and people will know what it cost God the
Mm.
first time. So their freedoms will be exercised in a moral way that will establish a reign, right, of a
Mm-hmm.
king,
That's right.
God, that will be a just social order. So let's
Wow.
talk about let's put partisan politics aside.
Right.
Left wing, right
Lowercase.
wing, ideology. Let's get the lowercase p,
Hmm.
move that to the side. But when you talk about the political with a capital P, now you
Mm.
have to concern yourself with some things because now you
Yes.
have to go back in scripture and study the prophets. And what were the prophets
Right.
doing? The prophets were engaged in social critique of a kingdom or a political arrangement that was fundamentally unjust,
Hmm.
right? So when God, now this goes to the more, that's the broad theoretical point. Let's consider the more practical historical point. Every time God intervenes in scripture,
Hmm.
he enters into history to correct an injustice, to
Yes.
right a wrong. In Daniel 2 or 3, when he enters into history, he's in the furnace, Icky, with the Hebrew
Hmm.
boys.
Hmm.
Jesus is in the furnace with the Hebrew boys.
Yes.
He entered he entered into history to correct an injustice. When Daniel went into the lion's den, God sent a divine emissary, an
Hmm.
angel, into
Hmm.
history. God again intervening in history to correct an injustice. And and then when he comes again, right? In Daniel's interpretation of the image in Daniel 2, which by
Yep.
the way is nothing other than a political account, a historical political account of the succession of kingdoms.
Yep.
When he intervenes again at the end of Earth's history, he
Mm.
will be the stone hewed out of a mountain, not with a man's hand that grinds all the other kingdoms into powder, again
Whew.
entering history to correct an injustice. The political is inscribed into Seventh day Adventist eschatology. It is inescapable. So,
Mm.
this notion that the church should not be concerned with questions of justice is really nonsense. Now,
Mm.
here's the thing, Icky. I love it when we say we shouldn't be involved in politics. Do you know that every Seventh day Adventist in
Come
the
on now.
United States of America, regardless of your race
Hmm.
or your ethnicity, benefits from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964,
Oh, I love it. We're
which
going to law. Come on now.
which, which is the law that says you have to be accommodated for your belief in the Sabbath on your job. Now, I just want folk to think with me about Seventh day Adventist history for a moment.
Hmm.
That law that we all benefit from today is the result of nonviolent direct action from Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which the General Conference of Seventh day Adventists
Whew.
opposed in the 1950s and 1960s. So here we are today, Icky, reaping where we have not sown.
Ooh, come on, man.
Here we are today, among the biggest beneficiaries of a blood, sweat, and tears struggle that we
Mm.
told our people not to be involved in at the time it was at its height.
Man, you better preach that word. Whew.
And so I have very little tolerance for anyone. I have very little patience for anyone who suggests to me that the Seventh day Adventist Church, who is the biggest beneficiary of a
Mm.
protest movement, should itself let not be involved in a protest movement and let other people do the work
Oh,
while
come
we
on.
sit back and reap the benefits. This is hypocrisy of the
Ooh.
highest order. So,
Oh.
yes, we should be involved. Here's the thing, Icky. If it, You might not be involved with the political, but the
Mm-hmm.
political will always be involved with you.
Come on.
It is
That's right.
ingrained into the very nature of our theological reflection, and there's no escaping it. I'm not talking about
Mm,
Democrat and Republican. I'm not talking about left versus right. I'm not talking about Fox News versus MSNBC. We got to get away. That we do have to get away from.
yes.
But
Yes.
what we cannot get away from, and what the Lord requires of us, right? In Micah 6:8, Micah's a prophet who looks
Mm,
at the political and says, there's three things you got to do. You got to do justly, you got to love mercy, and you got to walk humbly.
right.
That's the political. So yeah, we are
Mm.
involved in the political, whether we like it or not.
Oh man, how I wish you were here right now, hearing this live. This is where we eat. This is where we dine. This is where Dr. Tim, you've taken law, you've taken philosophy, and you've taken theology. You've packaged it up. You've helped us see it in a very practical way. And oh, how I wish that those who are floating around would tune in and hear that. That was fantastic work. I wholeheartedly agree, and you hit it on the head. We've allowed the lowercase p politics take hostage of our agency for God, for Yahweh. And
Mm.
it's muted many of us. It's created divisiveness among us, and we have not been able to stand firmly together as in biblical times. And maybe they had that struggle as well. But you
Mm-hmm.
see it happening with Daniel and the boys. You watched Moses do it. You hear Isaiah speak on it. It's just in everything that we, once you begin to read the Bible through these lenses, you cannot miss it.
Mm-hmm.
Mercy.
That's true.
Is that we're almost at the end of our time. We haven't even talked about masculinity or emotions. Well, man, maybe we've this emotions that's been worked up in me since you've been speaking, man. But I do want to keep us moving along here a little bit. Could you give us, we're going to do a 3-2-1 hack. If you're just checking in, or if you're with us, I am with Dr. Timothy Golden, and he is breaking bread of truth and life with us today. Let's do 3-2-1 hack real quick. Could you do that for us, Tim?
Sure.
So let's do 3 tips. Give us 3 tips on academics. How can I be a better academician?
Mm-hmm.
3 tips. Then
3
2 tips
tips.
on how to do how law, and then 1 tip on
Mm.
acting. Go for it.
All
3,
right.
2, 1.
3 tips. 3 tips for being a good academician. Tip 1, read carefully. Tip 2, read slowly. Tip 3, read charitably.
Ooh.
That's what I'll say. As to law, 2 tips. Um, represent your client as if you were the one who was in trouble. And your worst fear should be that of being unprepared. Always be prepared. And then 1 tip for acting is learn to just be. Once you've figured out who the character
Mm.
is, the world that he or she inhabits, once you've learned your lines and worked on the emotions, and you're familiar with the physicality of the character, trust yourself and don't act. Just be the character.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. That's good. I'm going to pivot us to masculinity a little bit.
Sure.
And I know that because of our time situation, we're a little bit bound here. But I dare to dive into the conversation with you today.
Mhm.
What is the story of masculinity in our world today? And as men, how do you suppose we've gotten to where we are in our relationship with emotions?
Yeah, I think, Icky, the story of masculinity today is a very confused story. It's a
Mm-hmm.
story that is not nuanced, that is not layered. It's a story that quite sadly lumps all men together as men
Mm-hmm.
without taking any account for the historical nuances and cultural and social nuances between one community and another. And in our fervor to condemn, to justifiably condemn um, violence against women, we sometimes have a bad habit of presenting an unnuanced view of masculinity that results in the proliferation of theory that ends up doing men great
Damage.
harm.
Mm.
Great harm. Every man is different. Every man, men come from different cultures, different backgrounds, and they have different histories. And anyone who abstracts my identity, for example, as an African American man into the abstract form of man or masculine is doing an injustice to me. To put this
Mm.
in theological terms, if you we serve a God, what did we say a minute ago, Icky? We serve a God who is so interested in history that he intervenes in it in order to
Yeah.
correct injustices. So if the God that we serve is so interested in history, how dare we ignore the unique histories of men in the interest of trying to help others, justifiably so, in a way that ends up doing them violence. Here I'm thinking
Mm.
of the poor man who was born blind in John 9, verse 2. We are
Yep.
told that this man's personhood was overlooked, it was ignored. He became little more than a walking billboard for the latest theory about why he was blind. And this is what we do to men
Mm.
often today. We have a lot of theories about men, and these theories are often unsubstantiated and harmful, so that when we see a man who's struggling, like the disciples, we say, who did sin, Master, this
Mm-hmm.
man or his parents, that he was born blind? But I'm thankful that we serve a wise and understanding God who says, neither did this man sin nor his parents, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him. So if we don't
Wow.
start nuancing
Yeah.
our understanding of masculinity, we're going to end up doing great harm and great violence to men.
How is that affected the identity of an African American male in relationship to their emotions, Tim?
I think the effect that it has in relation to the emotions is especially African American male in the church, right? We have these
Mm-hmm.
layers to our identity. For me, at least, it told me to ignore my emotions, that my emotions don't matter, that I have to make all my decisions have to be based on reason. I mean, how silly is that, right? Here
Right.
I am, a Christian who believes in a virgin birth and an incarnation and a resurrection, being told that everything I do has to be rational, right? I mean, think about think
Right.
about that for a moment, right? I mean, think about some
Yeah.
of the things that I believe as a Christian, and then we're told that our feelings don't matter. You know, Icky, I think this story of masculinity causes men to disregard their feelings. And if I could just make this comparison, I'll say
Yes.
this: God gave us emotion and feeling for a reason. You know, you have a smoke detector in your house for a reason. I suspect, Icky, that you don't make your daily schedule around when your smoke detector is going to go off or if it
Right.
might go off. But I also suspect that if your smoke alarm went off at 2:30 in the morning, you would be pretty foolish to just ignore it and go back to sleep.
Right. Right.
The emotions are God's way of giving the human soul, the psyche, a smoke alarm. They are the
Mm.
smoke alarm of the human body, of the human soul. They tell us when something is wrong. They signal to us how we feel in a given moment about something. Sometimes the most important decisions in our lives are decisions that we make not based on the objectivity of facts and figures, but on the subjectivity of feeling and emotion.
Right.
Sometimes the most important decisions come down to how you feel about them. And I
Mm.
can say from my situation, when I was had the job offer to basically start my life over again after relocating to Walla Walla, I made this decision not based on what it was like, what it looked like on paper, because if I did, I would have never came here, right?
Right.
I, I made this decision based on how I felt, based on a real sense that to remain in my previous situation was dangerous, that it
Mm.
was harmful to me, that I would be fundamentally unsafe in that situation. And that feeling of being unsafe is so important. And sadly, as Christian men, as an Adventist Christian man, as a Black Adventist Christian man in
Mm-hmm.
America, I'm told to disregard how I feel, and that's unfortunate.
Woo. Mm. How do you suppose we should, as men, as guys, deal with our trauma and our emotions and our mental health? We don't do such a good job of that. I think partially because we're told to be very, very cognitive, very sterile almost in trying to make a decision. You made a phenomenal point about how we talk about being logical, and yet our faith is built around stories of the extraordinary, right? Of the
Right.
supernatural.
Mm.
So how do you suppose, what's some advice you can give on how men or how guys, how we should all be dealing with our trauma, our emotions, our mental health?
Sure. Well, one thing I'll say, Icky, is that therapy is not a dirty word,
Come
right?
on now, man. Preach
In the,
that.
in the interest in the interest of transparency, I have been in therapy for 6 years now,
Hey, man,
nonstop.
congratulations.
6
Beautiful.
years, 6 years, and therapy helps you get to the root cause. And I'm not talking about a Bible study, right?
Right.
I'm talking I'm talking about I'm talking about therapy, right? I'm talking
Right.
about a trained
Fully licensed,
clinician.
trained.
Exactly, a licensed,
Yeah.
trained clinician who's bound by a code of ethics and confidentiality and so forth, a professional
Mm,
who can help you understand yourself, help you
mm,
understand why you do the things you do, help you understand why you form the relationships that you form, help you understand why your relationships are dysfunctional. For me,
right.
it helped me to understand the role that I played in contributing to the dysfunction of my
Mm,
relationships. So, one piece of advice would be find a good therapist. Therapy is not a dirty word.
yeah.
Unfortunately, unfortunately, there is a therapeutic bias um, against men in as it relates to therapy. I, for myself, was a man who lived with emotional abuse in a toxic marriage for 19 years.
Mm,
And I didn't realize what I was experiencing because we don't speak of men in terms
right.
of being abuse victims. We just don't.
Right.
And when you don't employ the vocabulary, you can't develop the concepts necessary in order to do justice. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, Icky, think about the current sexual harassment scandal of Governor Cuomo in New York, right?
Yep.
Suppose these three women that have just come forward came forward 60 years ago. Suppose this happened to them 60 years ago. We had no concept of sexual harassment
Right.
60 years ago. They would have been fondled or kissed or asked for dates or whatever it is Cuomo was alleged to have done, and they would not have been able to express that to anyone because there was
Right.
no language. Here, Icky, I'm thinking about the Tower of Babel and how
Right.
language is confounded, right? And I'm contrasting Babel with Pentecost because God
Mm-hmm.
suspended what he did at Babel at Pentecost so people heard in a language that they could understand. And once you
Yes.
can employ language, you can have community. That's communication, right?
Yeah.
And so these three women would not have been able to express themselves this way 60 years ago, but now we have a concept of sexual
Yes.
harassment. And that concept has resulted in concrete legal and social and cultural and institutional policies, right?
Yes.
Employers have to have a policy against it. Well,
Yep.
I'm sort of on a mission to make sure that something like that happens with the emotional abuse of men. We have to
Mm.
begin to develop a vocabulary around emotionally vulnerable, victimized, and abused men who are shamed into silence.
Right. Right.
We're shamed into silence so we don't report the abuse, and then we're told that we're statistically insignificant. Well, of course
Mm-hmm.
we are, because we're not reporting it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yep.
the shaming has to end, and there has to be a clarion call for a visibility of the vulnerability and victimization of men, such that we can begin to forge a conceptual scheme that will result in real concrete changes. When I was shopping around for a therapist, I actually had one therapist tell me a man can't be abused.
Mm.
It could only be a woman. I actually had someone tell me that. So
Wow.
find a good therapist and have a good group of guy friends, male friends, who you
Yeah.
can open up to. You can be
Yeah.
transparent with them. This is where the church can play a role. Men's ministry is huge here. I think between a good therapist and good relationships where you can be vulnerable and open up and cry, learn to
Yes.
share those emotions in a healthy space, man, I think we'd be well on our way.
Come on, men. It's all right for you to cry. If you need to cry, cry it out. Don't worry about it. I think that's so important to say. Giving men, empowering them to be able to actually experience the full spectrum of their emotions, not just the
That's right.
anger, not just those ones that are okay for men to be able to express, but
Mhm.
the full spectrum of our emotions. That's man, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
am saddened because
Mhm.
we're cut short on our time today. Would you in the future come back and we'll finish up our conversation?
Iggy, just say the word, brother, and
You're the man.
I
You're the man.
will be there. Thank you
All
so much
right.
for having me today, man. Thank you.
My friends, as you're watching along, I am with Dr. Timothy Golden, philosophy professor at Walla Walla University, talking about masculinity, emotions, law, theology, social justice, and everything under the sun. As we close out today, I wanted to thank you for those of you who were able to find us back on the link and catch up with us. If you're watching this on replay, if you're catching up with us on rewind, welcome on. I hope you really enjoyed this thick and fiery conversation, and I hope it creates fodder for you and your spirit as a male, as a Christian, as a woman of God, to think about the implications of all the things that we discussed today. As we close out, Dr. Tim, would you share some final words inspiring us and those who will be watching this or who are watching along today, right now, about hope, life, and us as the children of God?
Well, Icky, I just want to again say thank you so much. We talked a lot today about history, and we talked a lot about history and its connection to the gospel, history and its connection to personal identity, history and its connection to the plan of salvation. The ultimate historical intervention, Icky, is the word of John 1:1 becoming the flesh of John
Mm-hmm.
1:14 in the person of Jesus Christ. And I'm just so grateful that we serve a God who's attentive to history. If it's a clear night tonight in Southern California or wherever you are as you're watching, I want you to go outside and I want you to look at the stars. And when you do, I want you to consider what God did on the fourth day of creation in Genesis 1:14 through 19. There, he tells us, there, the Bible tells us that God put lights in the heavens, and he put the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And he said, let these lights be for signs and for seasons and for years. Let them be markers of time. And I want you to go outside tonight and I want you to look at the stars, and I want you to realize that the stars you're looking at have actually burned out a long time ago. It's just that they're so far away. The light from the star is just reaching the Earth's atmosphere. When you go outside tomorrow morning and the sun shines, I want you to take a glance up at the sun, and I want you to realize that you don't see the sun as it is. You see it as it was 8 minutes before you looked at it. Because it takes the light from the sun 8 minutes to travel at the breakneck speed of 186,000 miles a second, 93 million miles to reach the earth. Christian friends, I want you to understand tonight, and I want to leave you with this thought. Don't let anybody tell you that history doesn't matter, because the signs in the heavens, whether it's the sun, the moon, or the stars, tell us that we are a people surrounded by history. We are surrounded by the past, and we can't get away from it. The past does not determine us, but the past does ground us, and it does tell us something powerful about who we are and where we've come from. Celebrate your history as you move forward, and determine that although you will not and you refuse to be determined by your history, you will not be deceived by thinking that it does not matter. God bless you.
Ooh, those are some powerful words. We leave you there, my friends. Next week, we'll be with Marco Topete, and he's going to share his mind-blowing story and his emotions and all the practical things he had to push through with some good, stable faith and practical tips in his life. Don't miss out. But until then, I want to thank Dr. Golden for those powerful words about remembering our history and our story. And I want to wish you a safe and good week. Until next Tuesday at Tea Time Together.